Hello and welcome to an episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. My name is Jacob, and today we are taking a look at three brand new Bandai Movie Monster Series figures from the upcoming 2021 movie Shin Ultraman. So we have our Ultraman figure himself, as well as two cool Kaiju. So before we get into the actual figures and the review of them themselves, I kind of want to briefly touch on Ultraman in the context of this film and kind of my history of the character and all that kind of stuff. Ultraman, for those that don't know, is basically a Japanese tokusatsu kaiju superhero, and I personally have always wanted to get into Ultraman, being a huge Godzilla fan, but I just haven't really given it the time to really watch the movies and the TV show and everything like that as of yet. I think at this point I've only really watched the first episode of the original Ultraman, the pilot episode, and this kind of like Netflix anime series that came out a couple of years back, which I do have a little video on my channel as well. However, I'm a huge fan of Shin Godzilla, which is the 2016 movie directed by Hideaki Anno of Neon Genesis Evangelion fame, as well as Shinji Higuchi, who did the live-action Attack on Titan films and the special effects in the 90s Gabbera trilogy, which I'm a huge fan of. So, those two are coming back, and I bet a lot of the other people who worked on Shin Godzilla to make this movie, Shin Ultraman. So I'm definitely going to see that movie, and I think it's going to be kind of my stepping stone deeper into the world of Ultraman, so that's really exciting. Because I'm so excited about this film, I figured I would pick up the three Movie Monster Series figures that have been released by Bandai. So let's get into them. So the first one here is Ultraman himself. As you can see, he's got a very simple sort of design. You can actually see on the card here we do have an actual photo of the Ultraman from this film, and pretty much this looks like a very faithful design to the original Ultraman. I don't really remember if the like red patterns on the original Ultraman were exactly the same as this, but basically when you think of Ultraman, you always think of something around the lines of this guy here. So he's got a very humanoid body, very thin frame, and this kind of classic Ultraman-looking mask or face or whatever you want to call it. And this is actually quite surprising because Shin Godzilla took such liberties with the classic Godzilla design, and I absolutely love what they came up with. But it's surprising to see such a very faithful Ultraman to the original one with this design here. I think the only difference is some of the previous Ultramans have always had a little raised circular detail on their chest. If I bring in this other figure, it's my only other Ultraman figure really, is this guy here, and you can see on his chest he's got this little circle raised bump. But other than that, pretty much identical, although of course this one has a weird pattern because Ultraman has been around for a long time. They have so many different Ultraman designs out there, so many different Ultraman clones and other sort of things like that. So there's a lot of weird Ultraman designs, but basically the traditional one always really looks kind of like this guy, but with these sort of paint details, the silver and red. So that's really cool. They went for a really faithful design. This is a fairly tall figure, but very skinny, very small feeling. He's of course just made of soft vinyl, so he's a little bit squishy, as you can see there. He has a little bit of articulation. His arms do move up and down like this, so he can like judo chop, if that's what he so wants to do, or if that's what you want to do. You can turn his arms around 360. They don't have any articulation, so you can't really bend them into any other cool poses, unfortunately. Which is a shame, because I really wish that you could have gotten his sort of, I don't know how you describe it, but he kind of like does this, or something like, some kind of pose like this, and then shoots a laser out of his arm. It's weird, but that's what Ultraman has typically done, where it's like, "Wah!" and this laser would come out. So he's not really in an action pose, he's in a really sort of neutral pose like you see on the card here. So the card is basically the same size as any Movie Monster Series figure card. It's that standard size card. Just have a photo of Ultraman himself standing here in the same neutral pose, which is pretty cool. It has Ultraman written there in Japanese. Got Shin Ultraman logo up here. On the back, it's just the Shin Ultraman logo, done in a really similar font to the Shin Godzilla kind of logo, but kind of more of that Ultraman-y stylized writing, which looks pretty cool. And on the inside, we just have random Japanese legal information, so I don't care about that too much. But yeah, very simple figure, but very nicely done. It is really reminiscent, as you can see on the tag, of the Ultraman in the film. The only real issue on mine is there's a little bit of a paint rub detail on his eye there, where a little bit of that white paint has come off. Just has like a matte off-white color on his eyes. The rest of him is done in either red or silver. So a really, really simple kind of pattern and look to him. Under his feet there, just has that written there. 2021 SUM B China, and then some sort of barcode. There we go. Very simple, very elegant, nothing too fancy with this guy, but very accurate and faithful to the character, I would say. There we go. Just a good look around all the sides of this guy. I'm gonna briefly do a size comparison with this guy, just if, again, there's this other Bandai Ultraman figure. I have no idea what version of Ultraman this is, but I think this is a pretty standard sized Bandai Ultraman. So he's got a bit of more stockier build, and he's a bit shorter, which probably is more accurate to some of the earlier Ultramans, where they would have actually been like a person in a rubber suit, which is very tokusatsu, and makes a lot of sense that he'd have more of this sort of a build. Whereas this guy, he's got, again, very tall, very thin, but still such a tiny feeling figure. We can bring in a Monster Arts figure just to compare. I have this Monster Arts Godzilla here. This is the 1954 Godzilla. He's on the shorter end of things when it comes to Monster Arts figures, but you can see they do scale up pretty well together. This Ultraman is just a bit taller than him, but again, he feels so slim and delicate that that kind of still would be somewhat of a fair fight, even though this guy is technically taller. There we go. So the other two kaiju, let's bring him in. We have this bizarre looking thing with the weird brass screw-like colored appendages, and this, I don't even know how to explain what his face is. It's got this weird skeletal looking face with this drill head that opens up, and yeah, it's a bizarre looking thing, and the kind of typical lizardy body that you get with some other kaiju. And you get a kind of a more classic looking kaiju with this guy here. More of like a Baragon-like design, I would actually say, with this huge tail, really cool, rough yellow texture on his back with these like spines and all these big scales and whatnot, and this cool fangs coming out of his mouth and this big horn. Yeah, sweet looking kaiju. So I actually have to look this up because I haven't memorized their names yet, so just bear with me. This guy here is called Neronga. Neronga. And the second kaiju here, the really freaking weird looking one, is called Gabbora. Not be confused with Gabbera or Gabbera. You know the one from Godzilla's Revenge. Not to be confused with that one, but they do have similar names. This one is spelled G-A-B-O-R-A. When I saw the trailer to Shin Ultraman, which I did do a video on, I do recommend you check that one out. They did show both of these kaiju in the trailer, and this one was my favorite of the two. I really like this design because it's just such a classic looking, very typical tokusatsu kaiju design, but I really like the detailing on them and just the overall design and coloring. Unfortunately, when I did see that trailer, these kaiju did look very video gamey. They look kind of, the CGI wasn't the best on them, especially compared to Shin Godzilla, which again was made by the same people, which is a bit of a shame. So these kaiju aren't brought to life using rubber suits, at least by the looks of it. Judging off what we've seen in the trailer so far, they looked very CGI, which is a shame. But you can get an idea of that on the tag as well. There you get a nice look at Neronga on the tag there. Really cool design though. I love the scaling on this thing and just that badass look to his face. It's pretty cool. I do like that. And again, on the tag we just have the same details as the actual Ultraman tag. Nothing interesting there. But let's take a look at the figure himself. So this is the focal point of the figure's lovely face. I think it looks really sick. I love those big pink gums and lips with those fangs coming out. That looks really vicious. And again, he's got that little Shin Godzilla style beady little eye, which I think is pretty cool. And I love the armor plating around in his head as well, and that bright yellow horn. It's really stands out, looks really cool. I do really like that. One issue I really have with his face on this figure is, if you look at the tag, you see the horns on his head, the kind of like antler-like horns. They look really cool because they're like actually separate from his head, whereas on the figure they added just a block of plastic in between those horns and his head, which, come on Bandai, like, I get it, you have to mass produce these things, but that it looks a little bit lazy. I wish they would have cast these as separate little bits and then glued them on as little antlers. That would have just been minimal effort and looked so much better than this, but nonetheless, you get what you get with these Bandai vinyls. But regardless of this little detail, the actual detailing across the rest of the figure is actually pretty decent. Especially the scaling on his arms here. I really love the scales right across these. Oh, that's so cool. They're really nicely detailed. Each individual scale is very clear, very visible, and just the pattern of them is very nice, very elegant. I love it. Around the belly here, you get a lot of detailing actually on his underside, which is really odd because on the top, the scaling kind of gets a bit smooth, especially around, like, you know, the tail here. It's still there, but it's smoothed over quite a bit, and like on top of his shoulders here, it kind of gets smoothed over, which is a bit of a shame because I would have, like, if you turn him over, it does actually look like there's more going on detail-wise, which is pretty cool, and what is there is really nicely done. I think these figures were made by just 3D printing the CGI models of these actual kaiju, which often does lend to these sort of smoother areas of detail, like you see on the tail in some places, just like where, you know, the 3D print doesn't quite really capture these sort of areas all that well, whereas when it's something really defined like a scale like this, it can come out pretty good sometimes, but then it's like this mix of just these really smoother areas. But overall, the proportions and the detailing is really nice on this thing. What I do really like is the detailing across his back. Like, these spines, or whatever you call them, they do look really reminiscent of kind of like Godzilla spines, especially the 2014 design, where they are quite thin and pointy, and there are like 3 rows of them, followed by these rows of these, I don't even know what you call these big armor plating chunks, which do remind me a lot of Baragon's back as well. I can actually bring in the X Plus Baragon real quick. So here we go, we got a Baragon, and he's got these big chunky things that run down his back, and just overall the shape and general look of this kaiju is kind of similar to Baragon, I think, especially the GMK Baragon, the 2001 Baragon, which I don't really have a decent figure of. But that's just there to give you a little bit of an idea. So that is really cool. I really like the details on these. They're simple and kind of smoothed over, but they are nicely done what is there. And the color on them is really effective. That bright yellow does stand out quite nicely against this more bluey gray hue that covers the rest of this figure. And I also love this tail. Look at this thing. It looks like a real lizard's tail, especially from the underside here, but it's just got this cool wave to it, and it's thick. It's literally like half of this figure's length is just this tail, so that's really cool. They're going again with the Shin Godzilla inspiration, I guess, with the huge tail, which is pretty cool. You can see there. Paint-wise, I think this thing is done alright. The paint that is there is done good. It's nice and cleanly done. You got some airbrushed detailing across his claws here, which are really cool. They remind me of something like a mole's claws, because I think both of these kaiju actually utilize the same basic body design and arms and legs. They're actually identical on both of these kaiju, as you can see here. I think they are both kind of like burrowing kaiju. They're both digging kaiju. So it's kind of appropriate that he has these 6 fingers on his hands, and they have these big claws, and they really remind me of moles, which are digging animals, which have similar hands to this. He's got the more typical sort of dinosaur kaiju-like legs here, kind of short and broad-shaped, which do look effective on this design. There's a bit of an airbrushed yellow on his legs here, but it does look a bit awkward where the joint is here, and how the airbrushing doesn't really carry through onto the rest of the body here until it gets back into these designs. You can see that joint line quite strongly in the figure, but you know, these are Bandai vinyls. They're made on the cheap. They're fairly inexpensive figures, so that's not a huge big deal. I do like also this detail just here, where it does look like bones, this kind of like pattern that runs down most of his body here. They look like vertebra. And again, I love the spiny details on his arms here. These big scales on his elbows look really good. And he has this weird detailing around his neck, this kind of like webbing across. It should be more reddish kind of skin showing through underneath, which if you look at the tag, kind of make out that, again, similar to Shin Godzilla, there might be glowing red through that kind of webbing again, with more of that fleshy looking color. But here it's just painted in that gray, so it's done in that flat matte gray color, which is a bit of a shame that they didn't go that extra effort to paint that in. But, you know, again, these are Bandai vinyls, what you expect, you know? And yeah, overall, again, these are just made of the same sort of soft vinyl, soft hollow vinyl that you can bend and mess with, and have the typical articulation of any old sort of Bandai Sofubi type figures. So yeah, there is Neronga, I think, if I'm remembering that right, and then we have Gabbera, or Gabbora, I forget, but you know, this weird looking thing. So just like the other figure, I think these two have just got to be related, kind of in a similar way to how the kaiju from Pacific Rim were all technically related or used the same DNA or something to create them. This guy here, you can see, uses the exact same mold for the legs and the arms and the just general body shape down here. Yeah, they look almost identical in terms of their body shape there. So something's up with that. They also both have these huge fangs on their heads, which are both really reminiscent of each other. See on this one here, even though it's got this bizarrely different face, it still has these weird fangs. So yeah, these two are definitely related. I actually got to be flat out honest, I don't know if these figures are of original kaiju or Brassic Ultraman kaiju that they've kind of reinvented for this movie. I'm like, it is really fitting though, because this thing is so weird. You can see a nice clear shot of it on the tag there. So it is so weird, it would actually fit in Neon Genesis Evangelion as one of the angels. Just the design and the fact that it has these weird spirals around its back, these screw-like details, which do actually spin. In the trailer you see that these things are both spinning against each other like actual screws, and his head, I believe, also actually spins, which it can. This actual figure has articulation here, which is kind of funny, so I think this would close up. All of these would close up into like a drill-like head, and that would spin, and then it opens up, and you have this weird face with this, I don't know how you describe it. Like, look at that. How could you describe that other than it's like this weird skeletal looking face? It looks like its jaw and its eyes are just hollow, and it's just this weird looking skeleton thing. It's creepy, and I didn't know what to think of it at first, but I kind of like it. It looks so weird, this little head against like this big ass thick body with just all these bizarre like mechanical screw-like details. I don't know, it's a weird kaiju, but I like it. There's just something about Japan and their kaiju designs that's so out there, like nobody does it like they do. I do really like the paintwork on these screws, these on his back. It's really striking because it is metallic, this nice sort of bronze, brass, really dark, rich metallic color, and it does really make these pop. So sculpt-wise, he's about the same as this guy here, where some areas, again, which are actually the same exact pieces, like these arms and the legs and on all that underside detail, is nice and sharp and done really well, whereas other parts, like the actual screw bits, the detailing on them is kind of smoothed over. There should be more fine lines down these, and some more detail there, and in a couple of other places, again, like on the shoulders and stuff like that, where it does get a bit smoothed over. But in general, it is really faithful to what we see in that trailer and does look really cool. I'm also less of a fan of this kind of like more powdery blue-gray color they used on this figure, as opposed to the darker, more bluey greenish gray they used on this guy here. But it does make for a cool contrast between the two figures as well. They do have this nice sort of maroon, orangey red color on the inside of these, I don't even know what you call this, these weird petals around his head here. And again, they used some airbrush details across his claws down here and the bottom of his body here, and that sort of like reddish color again, and some on his sides. So there is a bit of paint, but it's done kind of as simply as can be, and it's basically what you would expect with a figure like this. Another thing I really like about these two is the size of these. These do scale up really well with your typical sort of Bandai figures, but they're also quite large because they are very slouched over, so you do get a lot of a figure for your money, basically. So let's bring in, again, some other figures. We have our Monster Arts Godzilla here, the little 54 right here. Very typical Monster Arts sized figure, and you can see these guys, especially this one with his massive tail, they really do scale up quite big next to this guy, even though they are slouched down a little bit shorter. Another one I can bring in, which is a really good figure, is the 1995 Movie Monster Series Gabbera. I recently did an unboxing review of this thing, and even though I praised it so much in that video, just the more I have this thing, the more I love it. Like, this is such a good figure from Bandai. They scale up real nice together, and actually these two, because Gabbera has a reputation of having really weird kaiju in his lineup, these two would actually probably fit really well as kaiju next to our Gabbera here. So that's kind of cool. They would actually fit together quite well. And you can even bring in the actual Ultraman next to this guy. So you can have Ultraman and Gabbera fighting together, which would be pretty cool. It's actually kind of funny, because again, this Ultraman is so skinny and so light, I don't know how he's going to fight these massive kaiju when we do actually see him in the movie. I'm worried for him, to be honest, because there's two of these guys, and they're so big and hefty. And this Ultraman, he's so skinny and small looking. He's going to have to work really hard against these two. I don't know how he's going to, overpower him or anything like that. That'll be interesting to see. And we can bring in Shin Godzilla himself. So we got the Bandai Movie Monster Series Shin Godzilla here, next to Gabora. And sorry, these tags keep getting in the way. I like to keep my tags on these figures, but I make these kind of videos a little tricky to make. You can see they do scale up nicely together. Again, Gabora is a bit shorter than this guy, but he's still nice and bulky and quite large. So they do actually look pretty good together. And same would apply to this guy here, Neronga. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, they do look pretty good together. And it's funny, these are, again, made by the same team that brought Shin Godzilla to life. And then we got Shin Ultraman and Shin Godzilla together, and they actually scale up nicely. They stand almost eye to eye, which is pretty cool. Godzilla's a tad taller, again, but that just gives you a good idea of what these two look like together. Until we see the actual movie, I don't really know what else to say about these things. I think they're just great. Bandai vinyls, you basically get what you expect of these things. If you see the photos, you kind of know what you're getting. So if you like what you see with these, I would strongly recommend them. They're pretty cool figures, and I'm super excited for the upcoming movie. Fingers crossed, because I really love Shin Godzilla. So Shin Ultraman, let's see what it's like. I'll do a video review and stuff like that when it does come out, and we'll see if we get more figures of these things. We might get some figure arts figures of these guys here, which would be pretty cool. That is it for this little review of the Bandai Movie Monster Series Shin Ultraman figures. Very nice. So yeah, I will see you guys in one of my future videos. But until then, may all your vinyl be a rated vinyl. Over and out. Bye.